Forum Borealis Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north, all citizens of the world. Welcome to the forum. Today we will dive deep into a century-old mystery publication known as the Kybalion. If you are unfamiliar with it, all the worse for you, as it is a must-read. Known as a study into the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece, it was allegedly based upon an oral tradition and/or a lost manuscript, penned down and released by 3 anonymous initiates who never came forth to claim credit when the book exploded like a newborn universe and found its way into any and every corner of the literary world. Indeed, few occult books can claim a similar influence, and of those who can, like Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, a major difference is the invisible influence the Kybalion had, as it's managed to spread its ideas into circles where it still remains relatively unknown. Friends, we are dealing with a twofold mystery here. At the one hand, the contents of the book itself, and at the other, the enigmatic origins of it and how it came about. One of the alleged perpetrators, if not the only one, is equally riddled with layers of paradoxes, a certain William Walker Atkinson. He has managed to become the perhaps most influential unknown writer in America in the last century. Not that his existence was a secret, but the ideas propagated through his incredible numbers of books has, just like the Kybalion itself, managed to become established truisms in the most diverse circles, again, without always knowing where and from whom this influence stemmed. Today we unmask the 3 initiates. We tear it off the authorship of Atkinson and of the book. If you are aware of the book and Atkinson, you're in for a thrill. If not, you may still enjoy this show, especially part 2, if you are philosophically and spiritually inclined, as we will share some of the principles of that book and discuss them briefly. Alas, much too superficial according to preference, but we are limited by this medium. Hopefully it gives you a taster so you can go further and meet the Kybalion by yourself. In part 1 we will do a more historic review, examining the context and times of its manifestation, discuss the authorship and bring forth basic biographical knowledge about Atkinson, whom has remained without a decent bio for all this time. To help us with all this, we have the pending Dr. Philip Roland Deslippe on board, who has done the most incredible effort to uncover all these layers of mysteries. And not only is that a first, he's also managed to retrieve the lost manuscript to a revised and updated, if not entirely recreated, version of the eternal cosmic laws examined in Kybalion. We will bring to your awareness these basic laws, but only as a skeleton, as you need his edited and revised version of the book to learn its philosophical depths. But first, let's present our guest properly. Deslippe holds an MA in American Religious Culture from the University of Iowa and a BA in English with a minor in American Studies from the University of Connecticut. He works as a historian of American religion at the University of California and focusing his research on folk magic, spiritual sects and Oriental metaphysical and marginal traditions in modern America, and currently writing a doctorate dissertation on the early history of yoga in the US. He has been teaching as an instructor at the Department of Religious Studies and Department of Asian American Studies at UCSB, at the Department of English at University of Iowa, at present Avalon Yoga Studio, at the Pluralism and Public Presence Summer Institute sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. Apart from his main education, he has additional training in associates in structural development, international spatial cognition, and research laboratory on the American Imaginary at University of Paris. He's also an arts photographer. Philip Deslippe has received several grants, fellowships and awards, and his writings has been translated into multiple languages, and he is widely published in both academic journals and popular magazines like Journal of Punjab Studies, Nova Religio, the Journal of Alternative and Emergent Religions, Journal of Yoga Studies, Scroll.in, Air and Space Smithsonian, Maryland Life Magazine, Tides, Amarasia, Contemporary Buddhism, New Thought, Sikh Formations, Tricycle, The Buddhist Review, and the Yoga Journal. Philip has also been interviewed and or consultant to many media outlets like Discovery Channel India, BBC World Service, People Magazine, J. Paul Getty Museum, Drawings Department, Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group, The Tribune, Los Angeles Times, KRUI 89.7 FM, Transitions Radio, The Infinite and the Beyond, Occult of Personality, and today he joins us at Forum Borealis to bring his scholarly perspective to the table, together with my own musings, as we reconstruct the old mysterious classic known as the Kybalion. Welcome to the forum, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I've been very looking forward to this conversation because I'll tell you, Philip, the subject today, Kybalion, the famous, great book Kybalion, has been a mystery ever since I discovered it at a very young age, as it has been since it was published in 1913. And we do know that at least one of the culprits, if not the only one, is a mysterious gentleman called William Walker Atkinson, and Atkinson has really been too overlooked in both the Western and Eastern scene, and today we're going to do something about it. Most people have probably not heard about him, although they may have heard about the book, very famous book, great book, and folks, in part 2, we're going to go through some of the main thesis of the book. But you, Philip, you've done really, what they say, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. You have really gone into the, and not only have you done it, you've gone into the question of the authorship.
Yeah.
But you've brought so much new stuff on the table. And I really thought I was an expert on this because years ago I wrote a 10-page article about Kybalion and authorship. And compared to the stuff you've uncovered, it's completely useless now. I mean, it was groundbreaking when it came out, but now it's already an anachronism. So you had the nerve to publish something you called the definitive, I think, wasn't it that? The definitive edition?
Yes, the definitive edition.
And I have to confirm that it is the definitive edition.
It's good to hear.
As folks will realize today when we talk about it, you see people, you need this book.
All right.
But do you agree that it can be a wise approach to start with Atkinson and then take a look at the book in part 2?
Yes, we could. I mean, we could do it any way that you would like. I think to talk about Atkinson is to talk about the book, and to talk about the book, I think it's necessary to talk about about Atkinson.
Yeah, we can't surgically divide it like that. But what I'm thinking, let's start with first things first. And I think that is to look into this much overlooked, much underestimated, brilliant guy that we know. Among else, we know as Atkinson.
Yes.
But let's start there. So what do you think is the first thing we should know about this chap?
I think the first thing to know about William Walker Atkinson is that he came very close to being a grocer. Atkinson, the author, Atkinson, the lecturer, Atkinson, the publisher, and Atkinson, the thinker, almost never happened. William Walker Atkinson was born in Baltimore, Maryland, right around the time that the American Civil War begins. And his father and his father's father both owned and ran a grocery store in the city of Baltimore. His family could best be described as upper middle class. They were a stable family. They were not wealthy or extravagantly wealthy, but they were stable. They were comfortable. And they certainly had ties to other prominent families in Baltimore. And it seems that the young William Walker Atkinson's life was very much laid out for him. He talks in some of his books about working in the family grocery store when he was younger. And it seemed that that was an occupation and a life that was just waiting for him to take over and to take on.
Did he have any siblings?
He did. He had, I'm trying to remember his family history. I'm actually not sure. I would have to dig that up. Okay. I believe he does have, yeah. Oh, I could.
Hang on. I think he has a sister, because I think I heard you say that when he had this breakdown, didn't his family live with his sister or something, or brother-in-law or something like that?
He had a brother-in-law. Let me see if I can find this. He has a sister. He also has. You're poking the.
No problem. It's no problem.
Yeah. Oh, now it's kind of itching in my head. Yeah, he has a sister, Elma, and then. Yeah, and then that's it. He just has the sister, but he has uncles. Yeah. So anyway, Atkinson has this family business that is in many ways destined to be his. And then he has what could best be described as a kind of mental breakdown when he is a young man. He disappears for several days. He writes a series of suicide notes from Philadelphia. Jeez. And the notes are sent to his relatives and to at least one young woman that he's interested in romantically, and he's very despondent. And then,
so he's single at this point when he breaks together.
Yes,
because he's born in 1862. And when was this first breakdown?
This was when he was about 19 years old.
So 80.
Yeah, he disappears.
89.
He disappears in 1884.
84.
And after this suicide attempt, significantly, he begins his study of Theosophy. And this really sets him on a lifelong path of studying esotericism and the occult.
Okay. Like so many contemporaries, he started through Theosophy. Do we know who brought him into that?
He seems to have been brought in through books. He writes in a private letter, one of the few surviving letters that Atkinson wrote. He talks about reading the book Esoteric Buddhism.
Right.
And the way that he describes theosophical titles, he seems very much aware of their date of release and his own discovery of those texts as they're coming out.
The future publisher in him.
So, yeah, I think it's also part of a reflection of how significant Theosophy was to him. Yeah. The very last manuscript Atkinson writes.
But if it's the book I think it is, I have it. It's not a light book. Esoteric Buddhism. What's the author? Is it Alan Leo?
I think it's A.P. Sinnett.
Yeah, Sinnett it is. Yeah, Sinnett. Right. But it's not an introductory book, so it's weird that he starts with those deeper end books. But he was a bright guy. So.
He was a broad guy. He very much, my opinion is that he sees himself as part of this theosophical thing that is emerging when he is a young man.
Yeah.
Atkinson's very last manuscript, the one that he writes shortly before his death, is an introduction to theosophy. So if Atkinson has a last word, his last word is an introduction to theosophy.
Right.
When I met with the archivist at the Theosophical Archives in Illinois, she said something that made me laugh, which was that very few theosophists ever attempt suicide because, believing in reincarnation, they're convinced that they will just have to start over
good point.
in their next life. But, you know, he seems to pull out of his depression, and then during that time in the late 1880s, the best that I've been able to reconstruct, Atkinson goes on really a journey to discover himself and discover his vocation. He travels around the Northeast and in the middle of America, and he seems to be going from one job to the next, clerk, salesman, doing these different occupations. And two things seem to be happening. Atkinson, firstly, seems to be in search of a vocation that is his. You know, if he has a business or a career waiting for him at home, he wants to discover something for himself. The other thing that happens during this time, I feel, is that he becomes intensely curious about how this world is working. So America during this time is going through a major shift. People are moving into cities in a major way. There is mass production on a new scale, and there is a huge number of people who are entering occupations of sales and business and management. And for people in those occupations, the world can seem somewhat mysterious. How come you can make sales and I can't? How come one new clerk becomes vice president and another clerk who is sitting next to him stays in that position?
But this was way before the Depression, right?
This is way before the Depression.
Yeah, so there was a boom in opportunities.
Yes, and I think this is where a lot of New Thought ideas start to take hold, because a lot of the New Thought ideas of how success happens, how and why people are charismatic, how people advance through the business world, my thinking is...
Yeah, you know what? Let's explain that, because today it's almost, people don't know. Back then, there was this New Thought movement that you're talking about, and I think it can be kind of compared to New Age today.
Yeah.
Because there was an esoteric boom, yes, there was, in Theosophy, in Masonry, and Rosicrucianism, and lots of other stuff. But that also happens today. So they had like an esoteric boom and an exoteric boom. And among the exoteric boom, we'll define in stuff like spiritualism and New Thought movement. And that was so influential. I think it's almost a direct predecessor to the new religions and the New Age of today. Because could you say that Napoleon Hill and stuff like that was a part of this New Thought movement? Self-help books?
Absolutely. I think the influence, in some ways, the influence of the New Thought movement is hard to see because it spreads so far and so wide.
Right.
Many people today who would never think of themselves as believers in New Thought or know anything about New Thought use the ideas, the central principles and practices of New Thought in their own lives.
And the much hyped The Secret.
Yes.
I think could be a very well modern manifestation of this impulse.
Yeah.
And even Trump is associated with prosper gospel Christianity, you know.
Yeah.
If you only think right, you can get out of this hellhole. It's all about yourself, and what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So that's influential in so many different corners, in different religions even.
Yeah. And I think New Thought helps to explain success and failure in a very new emerging economy and new ways of people working. When you read Atkinson's books very carefully, it's clear that he's imagining salesmen and clerks as his main intended audience.
In the beginning.
And some of in some of his Yogi Ramacharaka books, he talks about energizing the body after sitting at a desk all day. So this is kind of his baseline understanding.
Yep. So he wrote for several journals of the New Thought movement. For instance, I know he founded the Psychic Club and the Atkinson School of Mental Science, and he wrote for the journal Suggestion. All this is a New Thought, 2 different magazines.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of New Thought thinkers are seeing their own ancestors within hypnotism.
Right.
There is a school of healing that is known as suggestive therapeutics, and it's very similar to hypnosis. The idea is that instead of bringing a patient into a hypnotic trance, a person can simply be relaxed and put into a suggestive state.
Is this connected to Franz Anton Mesmer's approach with magnetism?
It's connected to it. In some ways, it's kind of best thought of as a sort of soft mesmerism or a gentle hypnotism. And this is what happens, jumping a little bit ahead, this is what happens to Atkinson around the turn of the century when he makes his second disappearance. So Atkinson, after he moves around and he goes from job to job, he eventually settles in Pennsylvania and he finds work as an attorney. During that time, attorneys would apprentice to a senior attorney, and then they would start their practice of law. Atkinson's past as an attorney is incredibly important when reading the Kybalion, because who else but a lawyer would put the universe in terms of a series of laws? Who else would describe the ultimate power of the universe as a law and describe the infinite as a kind of lawgiver,
right.
And a kind of mystical progression as living within and understanding a law?
Well, I'll tell you who actually. There is one group who stands out prior to him, and that's the Pythagoreans.
Yeah.
See, one of the reasons I'm fascinated with Kybalion is that in my own spiritual research, I've tracked down, I call the Pythagorean impulse throughout the ages, and it has survived and it has manifested in many traditions. But they had 10 cosmic laws, pretty similar to him, and the only thing I say is the big difference is the arrangement. The Pythagoreans, they connected the 10 laws to the 10 numbers. So obviously the first law would have to do with origins. That's the law of 1. And the law of 3 to do with creation and stuff. But when you look at, and we're going to get to this in part 2, when we look at his collection of these laws, and he, as we'll learn during this discussion today, he didn't just publish them in Kybalion, but also in a couple of other scriptures. We get back to that.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that either he has encountered, and we'll even get to that, the genuinity of its origins. Either he did encounter something that he took and run with, or he just infatuated this from his own visions, but hit a chord, I should say an archetypal chord, because people reading this stuff, it really speaks to the modern man.
Yeah.
It's not I'd say outdated, although it's over 100 years old. It's still so fresh to many people in terms of spirituality.
Yeah.
So I think he lucked out great. Maybe it was his lawyer background, but he was a futurist in a way. He didn't know it, but he hit on something that would work. This lawyer approach.
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to another quality of the Kybalion and of Atkinson as an attorney. An attorney is not only going to speak in terms of law, but an attorney can argue a case very well. And I think we see that in the Kybalion. It's very clear, it's very well organized, and also, like an attorney, it states and then restates its case throughout the book. Right. It's going to remind you of what it just told you. It's going to emphasize why what you were just told was important. Right. And I think that has a lot to do with the success and the continued viability of the Kybalion.
Good point.
Yeah, I think the book also has this continued life because it appeals directly to readers that can make it constantly fresh and constantly mysterious. The Kybalion.
It does, and even readers from all sorts of walks of life. They don't even have to know anything about New Thought or self-hypnotism or. It's not as much of a self-help book as, because now when we get to the Kybalion, we're getting to his esoteric side, and I want to go there. But let's do a little more of his exoteric background. So he joined the New Thought movement. He can't be said to be the originator of that. Who is he in general ascribed as the generators of the New Thought impulse?
New Thought is often in simple ways thought of as a combination of being somewhere in between hypnotism and Christian Science. The New Thought movement itself, if we can narrow it down to having a single forebearer, that would probably be Emma Curtis Hopkins. Emma Curtis Hopkins was a student of Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, and the two of them had a falling out. And so Emma Curtis Hopkins moves to Chicago, and she becomes what some people have described as the New Thought teacher of teachers. And Hopkins conducts classes, she trains people, and her students become the next wave of New Thought proponents. Any of the major institutions of New Thought can kind of trace their roots back to Emma Curtis Hopkins. And this speaks to what a vibrant center of activity the city of Chicago was in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Yeah.
So when Atkinson becomes an attorney, this is in the early mid 1890s, he's very successful, and he moves from Altoona, Pennsylvania, where he's an apprentice, to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And Atkinson has...
Is he still a single guy at this point?
He's married. And I believe they have a young child at this point. And Atkinson is doing very well in his own practice in Johnstown. He seems to have finally found his vocation, something that he's very good at, that he enjoys. And then things get even better. His former boss in Allentown invites him back. And it's assumed that Atkinson is the prodigal son who's returning to take over his former boss's law firm. So this is another step up. And then a strange series of events happens. Atkinson is denied a transfer of his legal credentials as he moves back from Johnstown to Allentown. So he is left at a really kind of dire crossroads. He can either practice law without a license, which will end very quickly, or he can retake the bar exam through the same people who denied him his transfer of credentials. This is, neither alternative is good.
No.
And Atkinson then moves to the city of Philadelphia, and he's living with his wife, his child, in the house of his brother-in-law, his wife's brother.
Right.
So you can imagine being middle-aged, having your own family, having a successful career, and then suddenly you're a guest in your brother-in-law's house.
Yeah.
And Atkinson seems to be doing little side work here and there, and then he promptly disappears again.
Hang on. At this point, he's already involved in New Thought, right?
We are not sure. There is no conclusive evidence that he's involved in New Thought. We know that he's reading about Theosophy. I think it's very likely that he's familiar with New Thought.
Yeah. Because I would expect you to begin with New Thought before you go over to Theosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Theosophy is, after all, a little deeper layer, but who knows? I mean, maybe he discovered New Thought through Theosophy. It may have gone that way too.
I think that's the way that it went. I think Theosophy opened up all of these ideas to him, and then he kind of progressed in what he studied.
Okay.
So he has what seems to be a second nervous breakdown at the age of 39. He disappears from Philadelphia for several weeks.
Nobody knows where?
Nobody knows where. Well, nobody says that they know where he was. But right after he comes back to the city and claims that he has no memory of where he was, he picks up his family and they promptly move to Chicago.
So now he's a man with a mission.
Now he's a man with a mission. He changes careers in the middle of his life. He goes from being a lawyer to immediately jumping into the world of New Thought completely. And he starts.
Is this when he starts writing under the pseudonym Theron Q. Dumont?
Theron Q. Dumont is a pseudonym that he takes up later. He originally starts writing under his own name for a periodical called Suggestion. And this is under a man named Herbert Parkin, who is a healer who uses suggestive therapeutics, which is kind of like this mild, gentle form of hypnotic suggestion.
Right.
And from there, Atkinson, he just starts going at full speed. He writes for Suggestion, and then he starts writing and becoming the editor of another periodical known as the Journal of Magnetism. And very quickly, the Journal of Magnetism changes its name to New Thought Magazine.
Oh, that's Sidney Flower's monthly magazine, right?
Yes, the infamous scoundrel known as Sidney Blanchard Flower.
Yeah.
And then once he is with Flower, Atkinson starts writing books on his own, and there's really
under his own name.
Under his own name, and there's really that's really where it begins, and it never really stops or slows down from that point on.
He was extremely prolific, right?
He was.
We wouldn't think he had a career or a family.
No, I mean, to get a specific exact number is difficult. I would say between his various pseudonyms, over the course of 30 years, he writes about 100 books, and he is writing, I would guess, a grand total of somewhere between 700 and 800 articles for various periodicals.
Jesus.
It's an incredible amount. I think part of the reason that he is able to produce so much is we have a little bit of a glimpse into his habits as a writer. Someone who saw him and met with him describes Atkinson as reading up on a subject. So for a period of time, a short period of time, he's reading, he's thinking, he's reading.
Hello?
He would.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, you fell out. Yeah.
Where did I leave off?
Well, you said he was reading and thinking.
So for a short period of time, about a week or so, Atkinson would delve into a topic, and he would read about it, he would think about it. And then when he would come to writing, it was almost like a process of automatic writing, although I wouldn't use that term. But there are descriptions of him at a typewriter, and then on the other side of a desk, there was a copy boy. And so Atkinson would type a page,
poor guy,
take the page out and hand it to the copy boy, who would then start setting the type. And this explains a lot. It explains why, if you go through his books, there are occasional typos throughout his writing. It also explains why he would be repeating certain topics and certain phrases from one book to the next. In many ways, it's almost like he was a lecturer who delivered his lectures in print instead of in person.
And it was common to write like that at that time. I mean, Rudolf Steiner, most of his literature was transcribbrations.
Yeah.
So,
and
yeah.
Uh-huh.
They often had fans who noted down, and it would be practical too when you're spewing off like this chap here. We're going to get to Yoga Publication Society, but when you see all these releases, just to have time to do all that stuff, he needs to ally with someone who can help him do the practical.
And I think that also explains why Atkinson, for the most part, with a few rare exceptions, why he never was his own publisher, why he never really tried to found his own school or his own institution. I think part of that
is... Well, didn't he try to... Well, according to my notes, he tried to fund the Atkinson School of Mental Science plus the Psychic Club very early.
Yeah, the School of Mental Science lasts for, I think, a month or two. It's a very short-lived enterprise.
Right.
And the Psychic Club was one of the things that many periodicals tried to do at that time. In the early 1900s in America, people have described Americans at this time as a nation of joiners. There are so many clubs and fraternities and fraternal societies and civic clubs and organizations that even magazines tried to get on it. And so New Thought magazine offered itself as a psychic club. And this is true of many New Thought and esoteric periodicals of this time. They would have times of meditation and sending out of positive thoughts. So the idea is that all of our subscribers are also part of a club. And so at 12 o'clock noon every Monday, we will send positive thoughts to each other.
Yeah.
Or there will be special notices in the magazine, or we'll have special badges or pins. It was kind of an enhanced sense of membership and belonging.
It was a part of the American culture. We have the largest Rosicrucian organization was founded by a similar chap, Harvey Spencer Lewis, and he made, they call it R-Mark, right? And he made... he took something that was traditionally very cloak and dagger, like the Rosicrucian Order, and made it mainstream like that. He too did this thing. They had Medifocus, they call it, which was every month there was this world leader. They're going to send positive thoughts to him. Rosicrucian Digest, like Reader's Digest. It was the sign of the times. That's how they did it back then. That's how they rolled. And this indefatigable belief in the future too, this optimism.
I think that brings us to Atkinson's moving around. He moves. He's in Chicago for several years. He moves to Los Angeles. Well, he's in Chicago. He moves to New York. Then he moves to Los Angeles. He moves back to Chicago. Then he moves back to Los Angeles. He's moving back and forth. He's someone who loved to be in motion, but also, even though he talked a lot about the natural world and he enjoyed being in nature, for many New Thought people, there was a lot of power in being in a city and being around activity and growth and motion and enterprise. And many of the New Thought, the exponents of New Thought in both Chicago and in Los Angeles, used the cities that they were from as examples of not just widespread growth going on in the world, but as proof of New Thought thinking and New Thought values. Right. Atkinson talked about being in Chicago and feeling this kind of bracing energy from being in the streets and seeing all of this effort and motion and work. He very much liked the nickname, one of the nicknames of Chicago, as the city of broad shoulders.
Right. And at this point, he was still, well, you said back and forth, and he had different work, but at this point he had started to publish stuff, right? And collecting a lot of contacts and becoming like a spider in a network.
I think so. I think he is writing so much because he doesn't involve himself in so much the business of writing and publishing. He leaves that to other people. They publish his books.
But at what point does he found his huge venture, the Yogi Publication Society? When is that?
No, that was never his. The Yogi Publication Society was run by a couple, Olive and Arthur Gould.
Right.
I believe those are their names. So the Yogi Publication Society, from the best I've been able to gather, it started as a bookstore that they took on and made into a publishing house. And they published Atkinson's books as well as other books. I think this is one of the reasons why Atkinson wrote under so many pseudonyms.
Because many of the books that they published were his only under pseudonyms, right?
Yes, and the Goulds...
Could you hold that thought? I want to find a book, and I want to ask you if that's Atkinson. 2 seconds.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, I found it. I've often wondered if this book could be his. It's called The Secret Wisdom of the Kabbalah. And the author is J.F.C. Fuller, and it's published on Yogi Publication Society, and it looks very much like both the Kybalion and the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians. Are you familiar with this book? Has the same symbol on it as Kybalion?
I don't believe that is Atkinson, and I say that just because Yogi Publication Society, they published several authors. It was not necessarily a kind of private imprint just for Atkinson. Right. So they did publish other authors, just because it was their imprint.
Yeah, Frater Akkad, he was Charles Stansfield Jones, as he's known. He was a real person who was published by them too.
Yes.
Yeah. So everything wasn't Atkinson. Fuller may not have been part of his.
No. One other thing that the Yogi Publication Society did is they ran. I don't know if I could call it a scheme or a scam, but it kind of was. They had 2 publication houses. They had Advanced Thought and Yogi Publication. And eventually what they do is they kind of, the husband and wife team who run Yogi Publication, they kind of go back and forth with ownership between Advanced Thought and Yogi Publication. And eventually by the 1920s, what they do is they push all the debts that they have to Advanced Thought, and they push all of the profits and assets to Yogi Publication, and then they declare...
they were scamming the readers, they were scamming the state.
Yeah.
IRS.
Well, yeah, they push all the debts to Advanced Thought, they push all the profits to Yogi Publication, and then, surprise, surprise, they declare bankruptcy with Advanced Thought. Wow. It's a good way to, fill a ship full of garbage and then sink it to the bottom of the sea.
Yep. And I have to say, it seems to me that maybe the better authors are on Yogi Publication. Some of those they published, we mentioned some, but we can also mention Marianne Atwood. Yeah, very famous. Among one of them is A Suggestive Inquiry into Hermetic Mystery. A. Gold and Franklin Dubious, The Science of Sex Regeneration. Yeah. Frederick Woolworth, who also contributed articles to Atkinson's magazine Advanced Thought. And like I said, Frater Akkad, who was associated with both Harvey Spencer Lewis of Armrock and Theodore Royce of O2O, and notwithstanding Aleister Crowley. So we see a lot of very many different people from different parts of esoteric milieu who somehow was gathered into this weird publication house that I up until now thought was Atkinson's, but he probably didn't have time to do. He just wrote for them, so he didn't do the publications himself then.
No, and I think that's why he was so prolific, is that he just left all of that business stuff to other people.
But he was involved, only he didn't do the practical parts.
Yeah, he wrote and he would edit magazines, but he didn't handle any of the business himself. Just I'll do the writing and you send me my royalty checks, that kind of thing.
Fair enough. Is there any significance to the place where it was what's called the Masonic Hall?
Yeah,
which was a Masonic building, obviously.
Yes and no. So Masonic Temple in Chicago is the first skyscraper in Chicago. It's the largest building in Chicago, and it is financed by a Masonic organization. And there is, in fact, a Masonic lodge at the top of the skyscraper. What they did to pay for the construction is all of the other floors of the Masonic Temple were rented office space.
Right.
And they financed it through rent. But ironically, the kinds of people who would very much want cheap rented office space with the address Masonic Temple are a lot of mystical and occult groups.
Yeah.
So the building quickly becomes populated with various cults and sects and mail order groups and astrologers. There's even a newspaper article that talks about the Masonic Temple as this kind of center of weirdness in Chicago.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, I can send it to you. It has an amazing image, and the title of the article is great as well. It says, "Freak religions from all over the world find homes in one Chicago skyscraper."
Oh, I want to read that. Yes, please send it. That's great. So do we know any other famous people who frequented this milieu here?
In Chicago?
And that he could have been exposed to?
I'm trying...
Because I read somewhere that claims that he was initiated both in Martinism and also, which was big back then, it's the right time, and also in Golden Dawn.
Yeah, I don't
know if that's, are we going too quick up the timeline, or should we wait about these questions?
Well, I think that we're in a good spot with the timeline. Okay. There is no evidence, direct, clear, conclusive evidence that Atkinson was part of any of these occult groups. That said, if you look carefully through his writing, he is certainly aware of them, and he is aware of them with enough detail that if he was not part of any groups, he certainly was very familiar with them. In the Kybalion itself, when Atkinson talks about the principle of gender, he makes a very careful and very specific reference to certain groups that use the principle of gender in a coarse and baseless way. And he is kind of very clearly pointing a finger at these kind of esoteric societies that would use sex in their rituals and their rites. In another piece he wrote, and I think this was for a magazine, Atkinson had kind of a write-in question and answer column, and one of his readers writes to him and asks, "I've heard about all of these different occult and esoteric groups, and I'm really curious. I'd like to join one. What are they like? What can you tell me?" And Atkinson writes back a very stern and somber response that basically says, "Be careful. You might not get what you want from that group. You might be better off just continuing to read and study and practice on your own." And he warns that there are a lot of fake groups out there, groups that are much more likely to take your money than give you any sort of hidden and reserved wisdom.
Sounds like he's been burnt, or that at least he knows the people around enough to be skeptical.
Exactly. And I think that points to a much larger theme in Atkinson's life, which is so many of the people that he was connected to, publishers, editors, co-authors, were involved in really scandalous behavior. It's
yeah, especially in the New Thought movement, because that would attract those kind of characters anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Herbert Parkin, who is his very first publisher, he gets involved in mining speculation in Latin America not long after Suggested Therapeutics. Sidney Flower is just he's just a cornucopia of scandals and problems.
Yeah.
Everything from stock schemes and mining schemes. He's put on trial and arrested. He publishes a magazine from prison in Nevada at one point. There's evidence that he faked his own death. At one point, he has a racehorse that he names after himself.
Yeah, he's a character for his own show, actually. That's how interesting he is.
Yeah.
But I have to say, there were more occult, traditional occult influences too around Atkinson. And we know that this environment, you know, they released classics like Art Magic and Ghostland. And we also know that L.W. de Lawrence had a publishing empire where a lot of occult, magical and New Thought organizations were flourishing. So there was conflation between real believers and opportunists, I say.
Yeah.
Just like in the spiritualism movement. Some people say that just like Emma Harding's Britain is the representative of the more occult part of spiritualism, so we can say Atkinson is the leading voice of the occult part of the New Thought movement, maybe the more genuine part.
Yeah, he often tries to draw clear lines between his ideas on New Thought and psychic phenomenon and occult matters. I think his associations, as problematic as they are, they also point to Atkinson's sincerity.
Yeah.
People often want to believe or question Atkinson's sincerity, particularly through his use of pseudonyms. And I think the fact that he never founded a school of his own, that he only wrote and kind of took his royalties from writing, and that he was never caught up in any of the scandals of his peers, they point to how sincere he was and how much he believed in the kind of core values that he was espousing in his writings.
Yeah.
Certainly for him and certainly for any New Thought or metaphysical writer during his time, there was an abundance of opportunities to take advantage of the public, which he never did.
Right. But then we know that he did cooperate with several folks in writing. For example, he cooperated with Edward Beale in his book series called the Personal Power Books.
Yeah.
We know that he wrote with aforementioned L.W. de Lawrence, who had his own publishing empire. I thought that was who inspired him to do publishing. But he wrote with him about psychomancy and crystal gazing. So
that particular thing is a bit of a misnomer.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
If I remember correctly, that book was de Lawrence taking one of Atkinson's already published works and republishing it under his own name.
Right.
That's something
because that happened a lot back then too.
Yeah.
So many plagiarisms flourishing.
Yeah, that was Lauren William de Lawrence's specialty, was taking already published texts and printing them on his own, and usually selling them at a premium.
Right, of course. It's going to be profit. But so let's go to the authorship. By the way, you mentioned he had 2 breakdowns.
Yeah.
Not 3, but only 2 in his life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the second. Yeah.
It's two that I'm aware of.
Yeah, two. And it's the second one where one speculates he may have encountered something or been initiated in something or met someone or discovered a script or something. That's where that fits, right? That speculation there.
Yeah, I from what I found, I think it's pretty conclusive that when Atkinson disappears for the second time, he is in Chicago and he is studying with Herbert Parkin. And Parkin is the person that he is with soon after his disappearance. I don't know what exactly happened. There could be indications that he was looking to make that career change before his disappearance, or simply that Parkin made him well again, and Atkinson had a convert's zeal to then further.
Yeah, no, but let's approach this rationally, because you hit on it there. He disappears without a warning, which tells me something sudden happens, either internally or outside him, or both. Those can be connected, right? Then he comes back and he's a man on a mission. In other words, whatever he happened, whatever he sought, whatever encountered him, he believed when he came back that he was on track. And this is the classical initiation moment in the hero's journey, right? And so even if it's only inside of him, but it can't be. Something has to be external too, because he comes home and he says, pack your stuff, we're moving. And I know what I'm going to do. So something has definitely happened here, to influence him. He must have gained some new contacts. And remember, the first time he broke down, the spiritual path was his way out. He discovered Theosophy, right? And he became a convert. Kind of the same thing is happening here, only it's hard to pinpoint into a specific group or tradition, because it's after this that he really starts his more occult stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
And about Kybalion, people have said that his early works, like The Secret of Mental Magic and Mental Fascination, which were published in, I think, 1807, 1808, or predecessor, it's stylistically similar to Kybalion. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, well, so the Kybalion is finished it's finished in late 1907. And then first published in 1908. The 1913 publication date seems to be the Yogi Publication Society kind of covering their tracks. And it looks like they let copyright lapse. And then they kind of moved the publication date forward so that they could then keep their copyright claim valid. But it's first published in 1908. I think one of the best pieces of evidence for the Kybalion being authored by William Atkinson are those similarities that you mentioned. There are so many similarities between the Kybalion and Atkinson's other writings, both in larger general themes and also in very specific turns of phrase. We have connections there with Atkinson that we don't really have to any other author.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. But then you have an even larger similarity, something called the Arcane Teachings. And that was later republished in a revised form called The Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians. And there, the pseudonym is Magus Incognito. In other words, he's pulling the same stunt as he's doing with Kybalion, because famously the Kybalion was ascribed to 3 initiates. Here 1 initiate, but it's still the same kind of alchemical tradition where you are an unknown. And in Martinism too, they call themselves le philosopheur inconnu, which means the unknown philosopher. It was the tradition in alchemy in the Western Hermetica to be anonymous, it was regarded vulgar. This is goes back to the Renaissance, to publish it on your own name. And so he kind of went into that tradition. But I say, and I have that book, and I love that book, The Secret Doctrines of the Rosicrucian, seems to me to be very similar too.
Yeah, I think this is where I feel comfortable calling my edition of the Kybalion the definitive edition for a few reasons. One is that I think it establishes the authorship. Two, it gives the history of the text for the first time in a kind of longue durée. I think a third major reason why it is definitive is the inclusion of the 7 cosmic laws.
Yeah.
The 7 cosmic laws is the second to last manuscript that Atkinson writes. And I think importantly, it shows that this idea, this running theme of the universe can be understood as a series of cosmic laws, and the individual can live in accordance with these laws. The 7 cosmic laws shows that Atkinson was still concerned with this right at the end of his life. And I think that changes the way that we can see all of these different texts, not as going to the well an additional time, not kind of copying himself, but that this is an idea that he is constantly thinking about, trying to improve upon, and trying to work through, constantly revising this idea of large universal laws and principles to understand the world through. And I think, that the 7 cosmic laws shows that he even says in the introduction to the 7 cosmic laws, he says that the writer looks back upon the path so traveled. He was and still is impressed by the important fact that in practically all such systems of thought, there is to be found certain fundamental laws governing the behavior of things. This is the lawyer and the mystic at the same time. He's constantly looking at what he is learning and seeing these laws at play everywhere else. I think this is also where the influence of Theosophy comes in.
Yep.
Atkinson is deeply, deeply influenced by Theosophy, although he seems to have only been a card-carrying member for a short period of time. Theosophical ideas run very deep with him, and that idea that there is a perennial wisdom, that all religions meet at some point, they're all pursuing the same truth. He is deeply invested in that idea. So he is constantly trying to see how different systems, what they share in common.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. We could go further. Okay, we see some stylistic similarities between the Arkan teachings and Kybalion. Arkan teachings being the same as, like I said, the Secret Doctrines of Rosicrucians. That's actually a more upgraded name. It's illogical that you would first call it Arkan teachings, but then when the Rosicrucian craze starts for real, it become republished as that to just to earn some pointers on the Rosicrucian hysteria too. But I'll say, in Kybalion, he talks about 7 Hermetic principles. In Arkan teachings, they talk about 7 Arkan laws. And in your wonderful edition, the latest document, he calls them the 7 cosmic laws, right?
Yes.
And all of them also put a weight on the 3 big planes of reality that have 7 subdivisions. But we can go back to that. I just want to point to another similarity, and that is the Theosophic work of Edward Maitland and Anna Kingsford. He was the leader of Hermetic Society, and they published something called an essay called The Virgin of the World in 1885. And here you'll see that these laws are named, but they're not numered like the lawyer did.
Yeah.
But the principles are very similar.
Yeah.
And they are also accredited there as Hermetic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Atkinson's use of Hermetic in the Kybalion is something that should be maybe not taken at face value, and just like his talk of Hermes and Egyptian wisdom should also not be taken at face value. I think Atkinson was not making claims so much that this is Hermetic wisdom that has come down to us, but I think in some ways it was a container that he could present wisdom within.
Well, both. I'd say another similarity between the secret doctrines of the Rosicrucians and the Arcane teachings that it was first called, and the Kybalion, is that both are claimed to be fragments of an original Hermetic teaching, and both have a pseudonymic author, and so those 2 points to being the same production, actually.
Yeah. I know after my edition came out, there was someone who wrote a thing about how these weren't actually Hermetic, they're not actually Egyptian, and with a lot more knowledge than I have, talked about exactly why the Kybalion should not be seen as Egyptian or Hermetic.
Well, if you look at the name Kybalion, phonetically it sounds Sumeric. But you common either to trace it to the Greek root word kyba, which is the same root as cyber, which means government or controlling, steering. But you can also choose the Egyptian ki ba or ki bal. So you can trace a Greek or an Egyptian origin to the word itself, and both of them should point to a Hermetic, because the Hermetic is nothing if not Greek and Egyptian.
Yeah.
So, but I haven't seen that article you're referring to. What's the grounds for denying a Hermetic trace? Because philosophically, it's certainly in line with Poimandres and Corpus Hermeticum and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think its argument was that there were inconsistencies with Egyptian magic, with Hermeticism, and the Kybalion itself.
No, that sounds like the fallacy of the footnote to me.
Yeah.
Anyone can go in and look at these nitpicking details and say, hey, this word wasn't used and that word was used. You have to look at the philosophical concepts. In terms of that, it's very similar to especially the revival around the Neoplatonism and the Alexandria schools and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yes, some technical expressions are very 19th century. But if you take the philosophical bulwark and represent that in a neutral language, nobody, would react to. It could be passed off as even an ancient manuscript. It's not that time culture paradigm. So I'm skeptical, but I have to read that criticism, to address it.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that, similar to Atkinson's writings as Yogi Ramacharaka, he is seeing these different things, yoga, Hermeticism, as ideal types in which he can present the best wisdom and teachings that he has come across. Yeah. In the Yogi Ramacharaka books, he talks about the yogi as someone who is in tune with nature. We can give him that, but then as someone who is very active and productive, which is absurd. It's absurd when you look at actual yogis and sadhus in India at the time when he's writing, but I think that's besides the point. He's talking about an ideal type in the same way that many people would talk about the gentleman as an ideal type,
right.
or a lady as an ideal type. And I think what makes the Kybalion so special, it's the best wisdom that Atkinson has come across, presented in a certain framework.
Yeah, but I'm struggling. There's three explanations. Either he joined something and got access to something, or he discovered something and republished it as his own, Or the third is that he just had this grand vision.
Yeah.
In all cases, it can be called a kind of an initiation in his life.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned his Ramachakra stuff. In his book, Mystic Christianity, penned under the Yogi Ramacharaka pseudonym, we find quotes from Waite and even Eliphas Levi. Both Arthur Edward Waite and Levi are huge mainstream Hermeticists. And so we see, for weird reason, in the Ramacharaka penship, that's where he's quoting those obvious Western Hermeticists.
Yeah, I think he's just drawing from a huge pool of inspiration from various different places. I think that's what
that proves that he's familiar with the concept of initiation, Western fraternities, mystery tradition, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, to this date, there is no conclusive evidence that links him with any specific group. He seems to have been too much of an independent iconoclast to, kind of give himself up to the teachings of any one group. Too much of a kind of independent spirit to do so.
Right. Let's approach then a huge point that we have to do when we touch this, and that's the authorship, right? Because we can all agree that at least he's an author. Now let's just entertain the possibility of other authors.
Sure.
And I want to start by introducing the argument, and feel free to debunk it if you think that's the case.
Okay.
The mainstream claim that you of course know, and that's that Paul Foster Case was one of the authors. Now the argument for that, let me give that.
Okay.
Case was, first of all, a relative of Atkinson's wife, Margaret Foster Black, and he was in Chicago around the years of the publication of Kybalion, and he also is known to have met Atkinson then. Now, for those who don't know it, Case was already an active esoterician then. He was a little younger than Atkinson, but he was a member of Golden Dawn. And his specialty field was Tarot, Hermetica, Alchemy, Magic. And from 1905, he actually, Paul Foster Case, that is, actually practiced yoga and pranayama. And that's how we encountered Atkinson's work. Now, he contacted Atkinson in 2007 after having read The Secret of Mental Magic. And the claim is that in this encounter, there was like a philosophical groundworks for the Kybalion in 2008. Now, I just have to add this. Many think that the meeting with Case and Atkinson also led to his founding of Bhuta, which was in 1922 when Case founded a course he called The Ageless Wisdom. And that became the School of Ageless Wisdom in Boston, where he then moved. And like Atkinson, he eventually moved to LA, and that's where Bhuta in his current manifestation took form. Now, in his news magazine, The Wheel of Life, in 1936, Case named among his fellow builders, which basically means co-members, pioneers in new thoughts like Helen Wilmers, William Walker Atkinson, Elizabeth Towns, Henry Wood, and Judge Troward have all made valuable contributions, he says. Other recommendations, including scientists such as Einstein and Jung, Manly Hall, Alice Bailey, and Mark Edmund Jones, the astrologer. So that may be just a conflation where he just invokes a name. But I have to add that Bhuta in the 70s confirmed officially to the members what they claim had been long known among their inner circles, and that is that Case assisted Atkinson in the editing of Kybalion. And Roger Kassinger, the modern publisher, claims the same too, because he has access to old documents. So, and then some say, but why would Case publish something outside of Bhuta publication? Well, he did publish his most known works, the Masonic Letter G, the Great Seal of the United States, and the True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order. All were published by external publishers, irrelevant of Bhuta. So that's some of the claims. What do you think about this?
Well, I think, well, there's a lot there. To go through it systematically, there is clear evidence of Atkinson's authorship that we do not find with anyone else.
Just a stylistic analysis and stuff like that?
Well, there's several things. There's style. And this is with, this sounds crazy, but it's true. Mm-hmm. One of my inspirations for doing research on the authorship of the Kybalion was this famous terrorism case in the United States with the Unabomber. I don't know if you're familiar with this case.
Yeah, I've heard about the Unabomber, sure.
So the Unabomber, he sent out all of these mail bombs, and he made demands that he wanted to have a manifesto published in all these major newspapers. And the authorities agreed. And they agreed because they had such a difficult time tracking him that they said, if we let this guy publish tens of thousands of words, we might get more information that will lead to his arrest. So the manifesto was published, and the Unabomber's brother was reading it, and he suddenly had this moment of clarity where he read the manifesto, and it had some misused phrase, something like instead of have your cake and eat it too, it was something like eat your cake and still have it, something like that. And so this man realized my brother said the same weird phrase. This might be my brother. And that's how the Unabomber was eventually captured. So I remembered this. And what I did, I was a master's student at the University of Iowa. I had access to anti-plagiarism software. It's where instructors can kind of send in student papers, and those papers are checked against each other, but they're also checked against the internet. And so I did that. I submitted a paper, the Kybalion. I submitted all of Atkinson's other published texts, and they went through this anti-plagiarism program. And in that comparison, it becomes very clear that the Kybalion was written by the same person who wrote William Walker Atkinson's books. But more importantly, there were no similarities with Paul Foster Case's works. When you look at what Case wrote and published at that time, 1908, it does not cover the same subject as the Kybalion. It's not written in the same style as the Kybalion. And it's also very unlike Atkinson, and it's very illogical to think that someone who has already been writing, someone who is at I would say the most prolific part of their writing career would need to turn to someone who is decades younger and get their advice. I mean, a lot of the evidence that Bharata has presented, it doesn't have collaborating evidence. It is coming out after Atkinson's death, where he is not there to confirm or deny. Yeah, I find the argument that Case was involved unconvincing.
Right. And there is, because, this speculation hunt comes from the fact that it's accredited to 3 initiates, but your explanation for that is as good as anyone, and you're pointing to the fact that it's just an allusion to Hermes himself, right? Thrice great.
I think that is it. I think it is. It's an allusion to 3 times as great. I don't know. So,
and you can also say that it represents the 3 identity of Atkinson: his civilian, his author pseudonym, and his spiritual name. In Esoterica, you have this mystical soul name when you're initiated.
Yeah.
So that I've heard, but then again, Atkinson did publish stuff under single pseudonyms, and if he was initiated into anything, he would know better than to, accredit his mystical name.
Yeah.
And it's a non-initiated action to do that in public. But Pat Zalewski, who runs Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn group, he claims that it was Charles Atkins, Michael Whitty, and Paul Foster Case who were leader of the Tooth Hermes Temple. And who were excluded by Moina Mathers. Whitty was leader of the temple that Case took over in Golden Dawn. But there are claims that Atkinson were initiated into the same Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn Lodge as Whitty and Case. But you haven't found any evidence that he was actually a physical member of Golden Dawn, have you?
No, I haven't.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that other usual suspects are Manly Hall, but he would be 11 at the time, so we can.
Yeah, he was not that much of a child prodigy, even at 11.
No, he blossomed later on. Others have been the architect and theosopher Claude Bragdon, the magician, and New Thought author Claude Alexander, the Mabel Collins, the theosophical author. But I say the best third suspicious person is... Actually, I also want to say that in Bota circles, there's rumors that the third one was Harriet Case, Paul Foster Case's second wife. But they were married in 1943.
Yeah.
And she was only 15 years old in 1909. Yeah. But they may be thinking of Lily Geis, his first wife. She was in Golden Dawn, and he married her many years after Kybalion. So, no, I don't think any one of these.
Yeah.
But there is this one, let's see what you think about her, called Mary Corelli. Art Kunkin has suggested her. And I have to say the things about her is that she was, her father, Charles Mackey, did have some interesting Rosicrucian heritage that influenced all the neo-Rosicrucians afterwards, like Pascal Beverly Randolph, Reuben Swinburne Clymer, George Plummer, Spencer Lewis. So she had some roots. And, well, before I go on, do you have any comment to that suggestion?
I mean, I think for any of the suggestions beyond Atkinson, I think the two most basic responses I would have is that because of the Title III initiates, in a sense, there's always room for one more. Unfortunately, the idea that there are three authors, however impractical three people sitting down and writing such a unified text would be, there's always room for one more. Even if you dismiss someone, that you can always add more. I think the central point is that instead of myth and rumor and legend, actual documented evidence, textual evidence, historical evidence, all of that evidence points to Atkinson and does not point to anyone else. My own personal feeling is that if Atkinson knew what kind of speculation that pseudonym would create, he would have chosen a different pseudonym. I say this based on two things. The first is seeing copies of Atkinson's books that he left to his family. He inscribed them with specific, clear instructions to his family that he was the author. I believe one of them was a Theron Q. Dumont book, and he wrote on the inside, this was me, WWA. And there's also his biographical listings in the Who's Who in America, which is kind of like a giant yearbook at the time.
Oh, yeah, Hartman's Classics, Who's Who in Occultism, is that the one?
This was a different one. Hartman's was kind of an occult version of a standard kind of reference material. Right. And when Atkinson submitted his listings for the who's who, he very clearly listed his pseudonymous works, including the Kybalion.
Right.
I think there's a difference between wanting glory and money from your work and also just wanting
basic credit. Right.
Simple recognition.
Yeah.
I don't think Atkinson he was very clear about it. He didn't want a church of Atkinson. He didn't want a cult of Atkinson. He didn't want the temple of Kybalion. He didn't want a lot of money, but I think he was clear about getting simple recognition of authorship.
No, but I think it's pretty clear that he penned it. But the question is, could the origins to it be more fluid, like conversations with certain people or getting ideas from certain people? I mean, nobody is an island. And we don't know too many details about who he frequented and how deep it went. So I'm just speculating here on the more, should I say, the impulse for its manifestation, more than who actually sweated with the typewriter. I think that's pretty clear would be Atkinson himself. Did you put Maria Corelli's books through this wonderful software you mentioned?
I believe I did. So if I mean, if any of her stuff is accessible online through various sites, it would have picked them up. I don't think Atkinson was inspired in a vacuum. I don't think he was, pardon the pun, I don't think he was hermetically sealed in a room and then began to channel the Kybalion.
Right.
But I think he's constantly reading, talking to people. He's also a fact that isn't really recognized as much as it should be. When you read Atkinson's magazine articles, he is always testing his theories through his own life experience and from what he sees in the world around him. So when he is writing for magazines, he's talking about observing dogs, observing young boys selling newspapers, observing people that he sees on trains. He is constantly working out these ideas in the world. So I think he is drawing inspiration from a lot of places, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's sitting down at a table with Paul Foster Case and
right. But what did he say himself? Didn't he say that he had an encounter with someone? Didn't he have the usual mythologizing of the origins?
Yeah, he has a few writings when he talks about a kind of hidden master encounter.
Right.
A kind of archetypical hidden master encounter.
Like everybody did back then, Paul Foster Case included.
Yeah, everyone did. My own take on it is that he is putting experience into a form that would have been recognizable to his fellow occultists and metaphysical thinkers. I think, putting aside whether he actually meets a hidden master, he undergoes profound changes, and I think that's a way for him to describe those changes that he goes through.
Obviously, in the esoteric tradition, that's also how you phrase it when you get in touch with your inner master. So it may be a reference to that. Which is the huge goal, is not to find the exterior master, it is to find the master within, as they call it back then. So it could be that simple.
Yeah.
But I'm not ruling out, because the saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So we don't have anything that will completely rule out that he found something, or because he did frequent publisher circles and occult circles. He may have found a document, he may have get in touch with a group, or he may just have been inspired by individuals, or he may have had all his networking, just conflate into one huge amalgam of illumination. So all those options are open in my book.
Yeah, I also think it's a matter of Occam's razor of it seems that the most obvious logical answer would be Atkinson, simply because he is writing about these themes. He is using the same kind of language. He's even using specific phrases before the Kybalion and after the Kybalion in a way that no one else is really doing.
Yeah.
Who else is staying obsessed about cosmic laws and continuing to write them and continuing to try and work them out?
Yeah. Well, I'd say actually Occam's razor tells me not that they've got enlightened, because that's the least likely, how hard it is to be enlightened. Occam's razor tells me somebody pitched it to him, but I see what you mean, and I agree. I think he did this himself. He was a brilliant guy. But let's not discount the fact that he claimed that this Yogi Ramacharaka was an actual yogi who lived in India between 1799 and 1893, and that the doctrines had survived through one of the yogi's disciples, namely Baba Bharata.
Yeah.
And he allegedly met Atkinson in World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. Now, there's no trace, as I understand it, of either Ramacharaka or Bharata, but we do know that a huge figure back in that day was at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 93, and that was Swami Vivekananda, who, by the way, incidentally, not just being a huge Eastern guru, but is also well versed in Western, namely Freemasonry.
Yeah, that's true.
Vivekananda was an initiated Freemason. So what do you think about those apples?
I think, like many things to do with Atkinson, the evidence and the dating of evidence is of critical importance. That story of the origins of Yogi Ramacharaka, they come about not during Atkinson's own lifetime, but about 4 decades after his death. Ooh. So that story comes out in the late 1960s in a pamphlet that the Yogi Publication Society sends out. So
could they go on publishing after his death?
Absolutely. And more importantly, what happens is Atkinson is writing about yoga during the 1920s and the 1930s. I've got to rewind that. Atkinson writes about yoga he writes the Ramacharaka books from 1903, 1904 until 1913, I believe. And they stay in print with one important difference. In the late 1960s, we have all of these hippies who come out, and they're really interested in yoga. And the Ramacharaka books are there as kind of a one-stop reference library. There are 13 of them, and Atkinson has written on all sorts of topics. He's written on the water cure, breath, hatha yoga, yoga and mystic Christianity, psychic healing. And it seems like there is a renaissance of people who are buying and interested in the Yogi Ramacharaka books. There's one great memoir of a hippie during this time who says that at the commune he was living at, they had a flag that they flew, and on the flag were the numbers 04. And why 04? Because they were such fans of the Yogi Ramacharaka books. And one of his first books, he addresses the correspondence class of 1904, his first students. So the Yogi Publication Society sends this letter out. I'm presuming with, I think, a fair amount of certainty, they're sending this out to respond to all the questions that they're getting from various people wanting to know who Yogi Ramacharaka is. And I think what the Yogi Publication Society is doing is they're cobbling together the little bits of wisdom that they have and creating a story. So we all know about Vivekananda in 1893. Atkinson does know someone with a name similar to Baba Bharata. He knows a Krishna devotee named Premananda Baba Bharati, who comes to Los Angeles in 1905. And Atkinson and Bharati they share a stage together. They know each other. Atkinson writes several articles for Bharati's magazine. And it seems like there is an influence from Bharati on Atkinson.
So that explains that.
But the story itself, the story itself doesn't make sense of, how could this Indian teacher be able to give great speeches but not be able to write books?
Yeah. Well, no, but that's just an ordinary poetic walk around. No, I think it's a brilliant cover story because Baba means ascetic and Bharata means India.
Yeah.
So Bharati is the name of one of the 10 Swami esoteric orders of poverty and ascesi, and can be traced back to the I'm butchering this, Sharankaracharya of the ancient Advaita tradition in esoteric Hinduism. And traditionally, this word, you bring it back to its own name, which in this case, Ramacharaka, is Rama plus Charaka, which means an ascetic who's wandering about. So Ramacharaka thereby means the wandering walkabout ascet Rama. You see what I mean? So they're constructing stuff here to make it poetically true, if not literally true, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Which is classical in the esoteric tradition. Kudos to them.
I mean, you can kind of imagine that whoever is answering the mail, you can just see them like banging their head against the wall with, what do we do with all these letters? People want to meet Yogi Ramacharaka and they want to study with him.
Yeah.
But in many ways, that's how the myth overtakes the history.
Yeah, classical. But could you say that Swami Vivekananda's yoga series influenced Atkinson's yoga books?
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear that he's reading Vivekananda and that he is using a lot of what he takes from Vivekananda, as well as mixing in other things to the Vivekananda that he is using. Atkinson.
And interestingly, in Kybalion itself, they only mention one author, and that's Herbert Spencer.
Yeah, which is the classic Atkinson move. He is enamored with Spencer and Spencer's philosophy, and that's I think that's kind of a signature to look for in any of Atkinson's works. He's always giving a polite nod to Spencer and Spencer's philosophy.
Yeah, but the well-known author, mystical author Muni Sadhu, was actually they call him one of the pupils of Atkinson. Is that true?
Well, I think that's both. It's true, and I think it's true in many ways. Many people want to believe that the only kind of legitimate form of tutelage or training that you can undergo is if you physically meet someone and you study at their feet.
Initiation and all that.
We kind of want to dismiss learning through texts, but because Atkinson was a textual teacher primarily, he's writing books that people are reading. Books have an incredible longevity and mobility, and his books are translated very quickly. They travel the world. They're sold throughout the world, and that allows for many people to read them and study them. So with the Kybalion, we see translations into other languages. We see adaptations of the Kybalion in South America, in France, and in other parts of the world.
And influencing new works where they take credit themselves without crediting Kybalion. You see that especially in New Age, where people write about these laws.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Should we take a break now, and when we come back, finish off with going through Kybalion?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll take 5.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website. YouTube channel or Facebook page. Thanks.
And welcome back to the second part of this incredibly interesting program we have for you today about the classical publication known as Kybalion. And at this point, we'll go a little more philosophically, I guess we could say, into it. So we have the text itself in front of us, and we also have the updated version. So we're going to go through these laws now. We're going to discuss them a little and see if we can understand them. Hey, by the way, one last thing about Atkinson and your research into his biography. Was it easy or was it hard, you say, to unearth stuff about him?
I know this isn't much of an answer. I would say it was both easy and hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a process where I think if I knew how much work was involved at the beginning, I wouldn't have done it. But it's one of those things where as you begin, you discover things, and then the more you discover, the more that you're encouraged, and then the more that you're encouraged, the more that you keep going.
Right.
But all told, it was a lot of work and a lot of hunting, something that was made more exciting and also more difficult by the sheer volume of Atkinson's work and his life.
Yeah.
Unlike a regular author, you're usually not dealing with 100 different books and untold number of magazine articles. It creates a lot, and especially since he moves around so much, that also added to it. And with the Kybalion itself, there is so much. What do they call that? Noise to signal ratio.
You're right.
There was so much speculation about Atkinson that it took a lot to weed through all of that.
You're right, but wasn't it also a problem that nobody had given him a due biography at any point? I mean, this is the first proper biography, isn't it?
It is the first. The introduction to the definitive edition of the Kybalion is the first. Even though it's in miniature, it's the first full biography in print of Atkinson, and also the first full history of the Kybalion and its influence in print. That's based on evidence and data. I think that was part of it. Is the more that I looked into the Kybalion and saw the controversies over his authorship, but then also the massive legacy and influence that it had, I felt that it was something that needed to be put out in the public of exactly who the author of the Kybalion was and why we can make that claim.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing that this was the first. But this was this a university task or was it privately made by you?
This was private. It was a labor of love.
Great. That's so great. I thought it was a thesis or something, but even better.
No.
You did this at your own right. Well, I hope it will sell well because first off, it's such a great investment you've done here for the posterity, because like I said, nobody has done it, and it's such an important work. And also, it is actually, because of all these re-releases and translations and everything, it's really never anything new. But this time it is something new. It is, first off, it is the ultimate release, and it's the addition of the biography and all the interesting stuff in the context. And notwithstanding, if you don't care about that stuff, at least you'll care about the second part of the book, which is it's not actually an early draft. It's more an updated version of it. Is that what we could call it?
Yeah, I think it's Atkinson giving one last pass through this idea of universal and cosmic laws. There's a very brief foreword to the 7 cosmic laws, and he talks about this kind of retrospective effort of a period of time in which he investigated the idea of cosmic laws and him going through it one more time. I think one of the differences with the 7 cosmic laws is you get to see how much more scientific and philosophical evidence Atkinson wants to employ to support his ideas.
So he wasn't entirely pleased with the first, well, not maybe the first, but with the version in Kybalion. So he wanted to explain the matter better.
I think so. I think bring more evidence, different evidence, maybe elaborate more on these laws and ideas. I think that's both maybe you could call it a shortcoming, but I think one of the reasons why the Kybalion was so influential and successful is that it presents ideas, but in a very pithy and open way. They're open for interpretation. You can take the principles in the Kybalion and use them in different ways. They are not.
Okay, let's start with the first principle of the Hermetic principles, Hermetic laws.
1. The principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental.
So in Kybalion, he calls it the principle of mentalism. Now, which law does that correspond with in the 7 cosmic laws?
Interestingly, it doesn't have a direct parallel in the 7 cosmic laws. In the 7 cosmic laws, he begins with the cosmic law of unity and diversity, where he says the universe is an organized system.
So maybe we can get to 10 laws eventually, after all.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like a better law to start with, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, he goes through this idea of cosmic principles or laws in the Kybalion, in the Arcane Teaching in 1909, in the Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians in 1918, and then in the 7 cosmic laws.
Which is the same as the Arcane Teaching, by the way.
Yeah, and then it's a little different. And then the 7 cosmic laws in 1931. Interestingly, the Kybalion is the only set of these laws that begins with a statement of the power of mind or mentalism.
Right.
And I think that is very clearly the influence of New Thought on William Wakefield.
No, I can see why he would start with that, because you have the notion of in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Now, if the Greeks have intended to use the word, like a colloquial expression of something you utter, they wouldn't have used the word logos. They would use another one. I forgot it right now, but every scholar knows this. So when they use the word logos, it's on a higher meaning of logos. Logos as, yes, it can mean law, but it can also mean idea or thought, something that becomes a word eventually. Like the word logic comes from logos, right? So in that regard, in the beginning was the idea, and the idea was with God, and the idea was God. That's an ancient old Hermetic interpretation of Genesis. And so when he starts with the principle of mentalism, the universe is mental, all is mind, he is probably one of the first one to clear that way of that huge renaissance and explosion that notion will take eventually in crystallized, like in The Secret or in What the Bleep Do We Know and stuff like that. So I think him beginning with the mental is brilliant. It's very Hermetic, because it's like, as above so below, but it is more than anything, it's mind over matter, which is so New Thought anyway, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why the Kybalion has been so influential. Is the Kybalion, like the New Thought movement, have both been so influential because if all you need is your mind, that is incredibly open to everyone. if all you need is your mind to change your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What more do you need?
Exactly. Refine your mind. And there's many groups who have that as their, forget about rituals and magic and predictions. All you need is just to change with the way you think. That's your redemption.
Yeah.
For example, Lectorium Rosicrucianum springs to mind. That's a modern Gnostic new religion. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's popular stuff.
Yeah, and that's my take on the word Kybalion itself. Is at a few points in the Kybalion, Atkinson says that the secret to the Kybalion, the secret to these alleged Hermetic teachings, is that underlying everything, the ability to change everything, comes from mental alchemy.
Right.
And I wonder if Kybalion is some kind of reworking of the word alchemy.
Ah, right. Yeah, you may be onto it there. Okay, let's look at this second law.
Okay.
In Kybalion, the second law is the principle of correspondence.
2. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above.
Now, obviously, this is straight from Hermes Trismegistus.
Yeah. And I think that.
Yeah.
And I think that, and that's, as agreeing with you, I think that's the clearest tie that the Kybalion has to the Hermetic tradition.
Yeah. And here you see in his first cosmic law, the law of unity in diversity, he does say that one of the principles is correlation and coordination. Mm-hmm. Everything depends upon many other things. But is there another law in the 7 laws that can be sidelined with the principle of correspondence? Which law would be clearly the same here? No, not polarity, not balance. No, it has to be the first one then. It has to be the law of analogy or correspondence, as they call it. Yeah, the cosmic law of unity in diversity.
Yeah,
that must be how he understands. He also writes the universe is an organized system. So if it's organized, obviously one part of it will communicate with another part of it. And when you credit him for being a lawyer's approach in this, it's not unheard of, even contemporary, because in science back then, they also still had this dream of finding a unified field theory, the grand design, everything connecting together, explaining everything. Even there, that need of coherence was present. And he uses a pseudo-scientific language anyway, which was also popular among many esoteric impulses back then. So
yeah,
I think that's also part of the secret of how he appeals across so many otherwise divides.
Yeah, I think the Kybalion also is very creedless. It does not ask you to give up anything or to believe in anything. And I think this is very much part of Atkinson's own personal philosophy, that people are free to take and give up whatever beliefs or practices suit them or do not suit them. Right. So you can be anything and still apply the teachings of the Kybalion, the principles of the Kybalion.
It seems to me he's really going into the 10 laws here, because I noticed that the first law is divided into 3, and then he continues with the second law, the third law, the fourth law, and so on. So that's interesting. Well, I also should say regarding the principle of correspondence that he's right, because we now know, of course, that the universe is holographic. It's the hologram principle really here. You know, with fractals, for instance, you zoom in and you can endlessly see the patterns repeating themselves. We know this, in physics. We know this for consciousness, for so many aspects, computers, you name it. So the principle of correspondence isn't hard to find verified in nature either.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have it in magic. You have the principle of, let's say, voodoo, which is kind of the same thing. It's the idea that stuff resonates, stuff which is of the same ilk, of the same primary nature. And so let's say you can catch a vibration. Actually, the best picture is just to use the piano, the key, the tangents on the piano. For if you take down, let's say C, you pull the string C, and then it will resonate in the other Cs, in the octaves, in the other octaves. And that's really what it boils down to. Wouldn't you say the principle of correspondence is a resonance?
Yeah. I think so many of the principles in the Kybalion feed into one another. In some ways, they could be expanded out into further laws, but I also think that they could in some ways be brought together into less and less principles. I think culminating ultimately into his idea of mental alchemy.
Right. Yeah. Well put. Another law here is the principle of vibration.
3. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates.
Now, in the Pythagorean scheme, that's number 7, the 7th law, which is obvious, right? Because all vibrations have a 7-stage process. You could argue 12, of course, 7 whole and 5 half tones.
Yeah.
Now, we should be disclosed that back at that time, in the early 20th century, science really started to understand vibration much better. It had a huge renaissance, and obviously going back to the days of, let's say, Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon, but even further back to the Pythagoreans. So we see how he popularizes this in philosophical, esoteric context. Now, couldn't we find the same law in the 7 cosmic laws? Does he have the vibration law there?
He doesn't have the vibration. Well, there is the law of activity. Everything is in constant motion.
Yeah, that's pretty similar.
I mean, despite being an occultist, Atkinson was constantly looking towards science and technology as evidence of occult truths. So ideas of electricity and physics and chemistry, those were all evidence for him of the truth of these universal principles. So I think it makes sense of why he would be so cued into vibration when he writes the Kybalion. He's talking about atoms and electrons and everything being in a state of motion and vibration. It would also explain why those cosmic laws would be revised again and again until the 7 cosmic laws. That if you're consistently looking out into the world for evidence of these ideas or further proof, the world is going to change, and you're going to be changing and revising your ideas along with it.
Well, until you hit the absolute essence, should I say? The archetypal design, and I think it's pretty close. That's part of why this is so universal.
Yeah.
I mean, everything can be expressed in different ways. He's expressing it in a way which is easy for us modern people. I mean, you could express this much more religiously and poetically through myths or magic or whatever. But it resonates because it's no nonsense approach. We understand his very clear, his very, like you point out, his very lawyer way to put it, juridical way to put it.
Yeah.
But in the term of the principle of vibration, I mean, that's an easy one because yes, it's been proved, and it's become a household understanding by now in many spiritualities too, that stuff do vibrate, from the minusculous corpuscles to the huge galaxies, and he's straight onto it here.
Yeah.
The next principle is the principle of polarity.
4. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. all paradoxes may be reconciled.
Like you say, I think that could be a part of the principle of correspondence or the principle of vibrations.
Yeah.
But yeah, any comment?
Well, I think, again, that ties into his central idea, I think, of mental alchemy. That for things to change, for things to be transmuted, they both have to be different at one point and then reconciled at another point. I think it also speaks to Atkinson's flexibility of mind and perspective, his ability to want to see many sides of things, and his very long-standing refusal to be locked into any kind of rigid dogma or set belief system.
Here in the explaining of this paragraph, he even mentions the term mental alchemy.
Yeah.
So that's pretty direct. And polarity was a big thing back then too, in science as well as in other modes of expression of wisdom.
Yeah.
What law would you compare this with in the 7 cosmic laws?
This is one of the few where there's a direct kind of connection. So in the 7 cosmic laws, the 6th is the cosmic law of polarity, where he says everything is one of a pair of opposites.
Right.
And that's a similar one throughout all of his sets of laws. It's in the Secret Doctrines of the Rosicrucians. It's even in the Arcane Teaching as the final law, the law of opposites.
This document, the 7 laws, were they meant to become a bigger book and he just didn't have time to finish it? Or was it something he gave up and that's how you found it? Or what's the story?
That was something that was found after tracking down and meeting one of Atkinson's descendants. It looks like Atkinson suffered a stroke around 1930 that diminished his ability to write and produce work in the way that he had before. And there's no evidence to say that it would have been published in his time or if he was seeking publication. But the last 2 manuscripts that he wrote and finished were the 7 cosmic laws and an introduction to Theosophy.
Nice. Wow. And that was those he finished, so there was unfinished manuscripts too.
Of what survived, but not much. Not much did survive. I mean, I think that's one of the aspects of Atkinson's legacy, and also ties into the disputed authorship of the Kybalion. Atkinson didn't found an institution. He didn't create a temple of Kybalion or a church of Ramacharaka. And an aspect of that is who is left to maintain records and keep things in print and keep advocating for Atkinson. There wasn't, as opposed to other groups, such as the ones created by Paul Foster Case.
Yeah. Good point. But so that means you came in touch with his descendants. Did they know about him, how big he was as an author?
They knew that he was an author. They knew that he wrote a lot and that he was influential, but I don't think to that extent. I mean, to be fair, though, I don't think many people could know the full extent of Atkinson's influence. And I think that's one of the contributions that my edition of the Kybalion makes, is that only when you bring together all of these different strands can you see a full picture of just how extensive his influence was. You know, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Kybalion is influencing the prosperity gospel. It's influencing the law of attraction. It is an introductory gateway text for many, many different schools of esotericism. It is used in different Black nationalist groups. It's used by a group of bounty hunters. It's really in so many different places.
And many works, books, traditions, groups, religions, you name it. Okay, and the people you tracked down, how far related were they? Was it the grandchildren?
Yes, I was in contact with the grandchildren of Atkinson, 2 of them.
And they were old now, or?
Very old, in their 90s when I spoke with them.
Right. But they had this stuff lying around, and they permitted you to republish it.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's so great. That's why we need academic primary research.
Yeah.
Pearls will come out of that. Now, let's move on to the next principle. That's the principle of rhythm.
5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates.
Again, I think it's a little weird that this is extracted from vibration and even polarity.
Mm-hmm.
But do we have any law here that could be tied to this one?
I think it's throughout. I mean, there's a law of rhythm or periodicity, and the 7 cosmic laws. There's a principle of rhythm, and the secret doctrine of the Rosicrucians, and there's also a law of rhythm in the arcane teaching. I think again, so many of the principles of the Kybalion, if you look at them, they are almost all of them are set up as kind of contrasting points. Correspondence is above and below. Polarity, we have polarities. Rhythm, it's moving back and forth to different sides. Cause and effect. Gender, masculine and feminine is in everything.
Gender is just another manifestation of polarity, really.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be its own principle. I think he mended that in the last version.
Yeah, I think all these, really point to that central aspect of mental alchemy. For alchemy, there needs to be 2 that become 1, or 2 that become reconciled. And so many of the principles in the Kybalion are about that, contrasting things that can either change places or can be reconciled or can be seen as a unity.
Or transmuted, as the alchemists would call it. And a transmutation isn't just a mental thing. I mean, this wouldn't be valid if he didn't stumble upon the real alchemical laws, and he has. Because if you're going to be a laboratory alchemist, and there are many of them still around actually, then you still work with these same principles. So what he has done, he's either by himself or by others or by books or manuscripts or groups or whatever influence there was, he has decoded the basic alchemical principles, and he has applied it in his very lawyer way in philosophy, and it works. And that's why he also uses examples in his, especially in Kybalion, he uses examples from nature.
Yes.
It's not just, airy-fairy, it's not just new thought here. He tries to anchor it with science, with philosophy, with practical examples.
And I think another reason why Atkinson and the Kybalion have remained so popular is Atkinson very much believes in putting ideas into practice and being productive in the world. And he'll say in many different places that ideas are not, they don't have value until they are put into action.
Right. Yeah. So he walks as he talks.
Yeah.
The evolution thing, or the cosmic law of rhythm or periodicity, is pretty similar. That's a principle of rhythm.
And I think that particular law, I think, is somewhat reflective of his background as a Theosophist, of wanting to see tides and periods, inflows and outflows.
Yeah. So that, but the principle of polarity and the principle of rhythm is pretty similar.
Yeah.
The same with cause and effect.
6. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law.
Here's his
Mhm.
law fetish.
Yeah.
Now, this is also a very theosophical notion. You know, they have the planes of, they have this emanation approach, which is completely different
Yeah.
to the two ruling. The two ruling is the creationism, you know, some external deity just magically manifests everything out of thin air.
Mhm.
And the other one being dumb, blind luck, coincidence, somehow that amounts to laws after a while. But the third one, the reconciling one, is the theosophic approach. Emanism is not, I don't mean theosophic as in the organization theosophy, but as in perennial philosophy impulse. Like you find the same in older traditions too, that, you know, in Kabbalah, in Gnosticism, that
Yeah.
stuff is ever in creation. It's not being created by a separate creator who's now retired, but it's ever in creation.
Mhm.
And I think he's on to this here too. This is very hermetic.
Yeah.
He's talking about how stuff is manifesting from the causal levels and materializing, so to speak.
Mhm.
Very theosophical, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the unspoken constants of Atkinson's life and his career as an author. Is he is, even though he is not for any significant period of time connected to a theosophical organization, theosophy is always there. It's there directly. It's also there in his general worldview. Even when you look at the Kybalion, in his kind of mythos of the Kybalion, he is going to make very theosophical moves to place Indian sages at the feet of Hermes, to see Hermetic teachings spreading out throughout the world, everyone being in line with the same principles no matter where they are. It's very much a perennial philosophy, perennial wisdom.
Yeah. And I do see in his cosmic laws, he talks about the cosmic law of causation. That's a parallel, obviously, to the what he used to call the principle of cause and effect. It has now become the cosmic law of causation. And the cosmic law of rhythm and periodicity is its own law.
Yeah.
Then you have the principle of gender, like you pointed out. That's a seventh one in the Kybalion.
7. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes.
Now that's not translated to its own law in the cosmic laws. You have the cosmic law of balance or compensation, but you could also put gender into polarity. You could put it into involution, evolution. So he's cleaned up. I think it's a better, what he had at the end here, those 7 cosmic laws are better actually.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the relationship, a way to talk about the relationship between the Kybalion and the 7 cosmic laws is almost like the difference between, a film and the director's cut of a film, or a film and then a film with the director's commentary laid over it. It's at root, it's the same thing, but with the 7 cosmic laws, you get that kind of later perspective, or the additional remarks that couldn't come at the time of creation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. He doesn't elaborate as much as he's doing in Kybalion. Every principle is explained and illustrated and foolproofed.
Yes.
In the 7 laws, he seemed content with sticking to the just pristine principle of it, the higher meaning of it, and doesn't go that much into, or maybe he didn't have time before he died.
Yeah, it's hard to tell without any more kind of historical detail. But it is shorter. It's briefer. Yeah,
It's more like a draft, it seems.
yeah.
But then again, you said he didn't want to get it published.
That too is not clear. It was a completed manuscript, but there was not additional material that would have suggested a kind of course of publication or interested publishers or anything like that.
Amazing that this wasn't published until you got your hands on it.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I'm glad that it's out on its own, but I'm also glad that it can be something else that adds perspective to the Kybalion. I think the Kybalion has had such an influence on so many people and in so many different realms that it's worth knowing the background for it. I think you can read the Kybalion as it is, and that's fine. But I think it has been taken so seriously by so many people that it's worth having that background. It's worth knowing who wrote it. My hope is that people who got something out of the Kybalion and want to go further with it, by knowing its authorship, they can then start engaging with the works of Atkinson. And similarly, once you know that Atkinson is the author, you can start to see his fingerprints in the Kybalion and make more sense of it. I think in many ways the Kybalion is it's an unrecognized classic of New Thought. It is espousing so much of New Thought, even though it's not really seen as that.
But more than all this, with the new and final edition, they will get a much better introduction to the philosophy itself.
Yeah,
because
it's different.
I think that the Seven Cosmic Laws are a better. It's perfect for those who read Kybalion. Mm-hmm. They can now move on and read this one, and they will get another philosophical layer. I see here he's quoting freely. He's not covering up anymore. He's quoting stuff like Blavatsky and Secret Doctrine.
Yeah.
He's quoting Eliphas Levi. Mm-hmm. And all sorts of basic influences. So just that admittance, he's familiar with obviously the Book of Zion, which is Blavatsky's Kybalion.
Yes.
So yeah, there has to be influences directly from that one, I think.
Yeah, I mean the more. Yeah.
And ancient Greek philosophers he's quoting, Heraclit. Mm-hmm. Who was just as great as Pythagoras in some of the realization. He quoted the Buddha. Mm-hmm. So going in these directions, you can find similarities in the doctrines of these systems too. There are similarities between ancient pre-Socratic philosophers and... Mm-hmm. I mean, Pythagoras worked at the same time as Buddha and Lao Tse, and all three of them had a nature-based philosophy, pretty similar. The cultural expressions are different, of course, the language, the symbolism, but they all worked about the same time on Earth, and they had a product that's pretty similar at the end of the day, philosophically speaking. So it would be no big leap for Atkinson to draw upon such classical, basic sources, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, as you mentioned, one of the things that makes the Seven Cosmic Laws valuable is that Atkinson is like a mathematics proof. He's starting to show his work more in there. He's kind of revealing more of his influences and where he's drawing from.
Let's go a little more through the cosmic laws before we end this.
Okay.
So let's take a look at the Seven Cosmic Law. So in this revised edition, he starts with the cosmic law of unity in diversity. And he quotes here, the universe is an organized system. But interestingly, he doesn't name the quotes anymore. Because in Kybalion, he names it the Kybalion. That's the source.
Yeah.
Here he seems he hasn't gotten around to do that yet. If it's a finished manuscript, I guess he didn't intend it, but it's weird.
Yeah, I mean the Kybalion itself is kind of weird in that way, where in the Kybalion there is a reference to a written book that is known as the Kybalion. There is a reference to a series of oral teachings known as the Kybalion.
Yep.
It's kind of murky what exactly the Kybalion itself is, this ancient Kybalion.
Yeah.
I think in some ways.
And here he doesn't mention it.
No.
And you would expect him to use that as the source, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same setup. He starts with naming the law, then with a quote, and then with a brief explanation. It's the exact same setup as in Kybalion. Only he doesn't say what he's quoting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the original Kybalion, the 1908 Kybalion, it's two things. It's a series of axioms and statements, but it's also this mythology that kind of encases those axioms. When I go back and I reread the Kybalion, I'm kind of stunned at, you could kind of divide the book into two. You could have a much shorter book of axioms and their explanation, but you also have a really large amount of mythology of ancient Egypt and sages from India, and the teacher of Moses, and the students and the teacher.
Quantum physics.
Yeah, you have
everything is in there.
You have all of this stuff, and I mean, I think that the two kind of work together. I think the reason why the Kybalion has had such an influence, and it remains so much of a living kind of book that continues to reach people, is because of that mythology.
Yeah.
That it's not just 7 laws to live by, but it creates this mythology that brings its readers into it. There are so many places in the Kybalion where it says the people who encounter these teachings are ready for them. They're special. Right. They're select. They're few. So if you're a reader, you feel invested in what those laws are.
Absolutely. I mean, he says when the ears of let's find the exact quote.
The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. The Kybalion.
This is like a postscript. That's pretty similar to the, ask and you shall receive, knock and it shall be opened for you, from the Bible, right? And seek and ye shall find. So it's a kind of the same principle he's coining there. Yeah. And I also believe he has a version of when the disciple is ready, the master appears. I think he has a similar take on that too somewhere in his book.
Yeah. And I mean, if there is a generous way to understand why Atkinson used a pseudonym, why he created this mythology of a Hermetic Egyptian ancient Kybalion, I think it can be that it was a way to present what he thought were important, helpful truths in a way that people would be receptive to them, that they could recognize the importance of them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. He says in the beginning of chapter 2, he says, supposedly a quote from Kybalion,
the 7 Hermetic principles. The principles of truth are 7. He who knows these understandingly possesses the magic key before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The Kybalion.
And then he lists them. The principle of mentalism, we've said, the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, the principle of polarity, the principle of rhythm, the principle of cause and effect, the principle of gender. 7, obviously, very, very hermetic too. And now, when we get to the 7 cosmic laws, we find that they've changed as we've touched upon. So let's just go through them briefly.
The 7 cosmic laws. 1. The cosmic law of unity and diversity. The universe is an organized system. Composition. Everything is made up of parts. Correlation and coordination. Everything depends upon many other things. Differentiation. No two things are exactly alike. Analogy or correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. 2. The cosmic law of activity. Everything is in constant motion. 3. The cosmic law of change. Everything changes. Nothing is permanent. Continuity or orderly sequence. Everything flows in a constant stream. 4. The cosmic law of causation. Everything happens by way of a cause. 5. The cosmic law of rhythm or periodicity. Everything moves in rhythmic cycles. Involution, evolution. Involution always precedes evolution. 6. The cosmic law of polarity. Everything is one of a pair of opposites. 7. The cosmic law of balance or compensation. All things are balanced.
So there was the cosmic law of unity in diversity. Now, obviously, this is easy to swallow. It aligns with all sorts of monotheism or the belief in, even if you believe in many gods, there's this para Brahman, this ultimate one. Well, yeah, I'm just saying that that's an easy sell. And then he adds composition.
Yeah.
He adds correlation and coordination, and he adds differentiation. And he adds analogy or correspondence, as within, so without. Now he added that one too.
Yeah.
That wasn't in the original one.
Right.
Unless he described it. So here he seems to cover his bases by injecting many of the leftover principles of Kybalion into this first one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, these further books are chances for him to fill in gaps or restate his case in a different way.
More precisely, more in surveying. He obviously felt that the 7 principles weren't, that they were too messy, that some were just parts of the same and some were unnamed. So he obviously felt the need to, and he only called them, maybe it was blind luck or maybe it was foresight, but he called them principles back then. He didn't clearly state them as cosmic laws as he does now. Although he did it by implication in Kybalion, and people do refer to them as cosmic laws. But in this one, he actually calls them the cosmic laws, and he can get away with it because then he can say, no, the others I mentioned were just principles. That's subsets of laws, right? So one law can have several principles. So here, this is the ultimate cosmic design, so to speak, because this is the 7 cosmic laws. And then you find several principles in the first one, the law of unity. And that corresponds with Pythagorean. They have 10 laws too, and the first one is law of unity. So, I mean, it may be plain logic, it may be synchronicity, or he may have been in touch with something similar, but he's onto it.
Yeah.
Then you have the cosmic law of activity. That we mentioned, that's pretty similar to the one with vibration, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with just slightly different language.
Right. Yeah. So here he first introduces the concept of everything is one, everything is coherent, but within the one there is movement, there is activity, there is vibration.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And then again he's onto it. The third cosmic law is the law of change. I think it's brilliant to put it as the third, because that's the third principle in nature too, where you have one and you introduce a second that leads to creation or change, if you will. A third, like you'll never have, nothing will rest in the principle of 3. You'll have ever movement because there'll always be 2 against 1. Like in a weight, if you have on a weight 2 complete similar things, it will be balance. But as soon as you introduce something more on the one side, bam, the scales tip.
Yeah.
And the same back and forth, back and forth. So that's the clue to vibration too. In sacred geometry, numerology, all this stuff, it can be said to be causation. That's something new happens. So he's very clever putting this as the third, because that's confirmed by nature, philosophy or whatever, law of creation, the law of three. And as a subset here, he says continuity or orderly sequence. And then he goes on to the fourth law, the cosmic law of causation. That's similar to the principle of cause and effect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting anecdotes that I heard from one of Atkinson's grandchildren is that towards the end of his life, Atkinson would refuse to drive cars. He would ride in cars, but he would not get behind the wheel and drive a car. And apparently his fear was if he got into an accident or if he caused an accident and hurt someone, he didn't want to take on that kind of consequence or karma. which was fascinating, because it's another example of him believing what he is espousing in his writings.
Yeah, good point. He's living up to his own principles.
Mm-hmm.
And cars were the new fad back then, so
yeah,
it wasn't as given as it is now. Then the next would be the cosmic law of rhythm or periodicity. That's the fifth law. No, that's the same as the principle of rhythm, I guess. And periodicity, measured cycle, involution, evolution. Involution always precedes evolution. So here we have the idea again of causation, invisible causation, like Alfred Russel Wallace too talked about, intelligent design, that stuff. Evolution is really driven by an invisible germ, a seed, something that's striving to manifest and blooming to becoming something else. I guess that's what he's getting at here.
Yeah.
Well, we can't know, but that's my guess. Then you have the next law is the cosmic law of polarity. That's pretty similar to the one in Kybalion too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Everything has its pair of opposites. It's from the Kybalion. Yeah, it's pretty unchanged.
Yeah, and he's right here too, of course, because is there anything we can see in the world, then it's the dualism, the contrasts.
Yeah.
And he named it here as the sixth law. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's the sixth law. So that makes sense, because the principle of six that's a huge polarity. Mm-hmm. It's the polarity of the above and the polarity of the below, of the two triangles. Mm-hmm. So six is the fusion of the two triangles, of the two creation principles, above with below, macro with micro. Mm-hmm. It's the hexagram, the higher world and lower world. I'm just trying to tie it into classical Hermeticism to see how valid it is philosophically. And it seems to me he's getting closer to it here. Mm-hmm. So again, it's not a bad move to put that up as the sixth law. So the last law is the cosmic law of balance or compensation. And I guess that's similar to, that's its own law here now, balance. That's very Tao. But it's in polarity, it's in rhythm, it's in cause and effect, and it's in gender. He removed the gender thing and he puts in this. So I think it's a better expression. Put it as a seventh? No, I would put the vibration law as a seventh, because there's 7 principles in vibration. Yeah. So philosophically, I don't know. And it's a very short segment to this law of balance or compensation. I think it should be more a part of the other laws he mentioned.
Yeah. And again, it's hard to tell how finished the 7 cosmic laws were.
Yeah.
Again, they were written towards the end of his life, and it's hard to know exactly what his health was or his state of being was. If he would have come back and revised those laws, added to them, or we're not quite sure.
But you are familiar with lots of his different literature, right? You've read many of his books.
Yeah. Yes.
Less popular books.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you say does he show an interest in science and scientific principles?
Very much so. And again, I think this is it's an interesting combination. One of the things that I've been trying to do with Atkinson is trace back the references he makes and try to, in a sense, recreate his library shelves. Every time he references an author or a book or he quotes someone. And one of the interesting things that I found doing that is among all of his many, many references to scientific discoveries, scientists, scientific theories, scientific facts, he seems to be getting a lot of those from theosophical literature. Where he is not just quoting advances in science at random or from general sources, but he seems to be picking them up from theosophical literature. And when in theosophical periodicals they are citing a scientific innovation, he's making note of it through that. So it speaks to Atkinson both as a very committed theosophist, but also someone who is looking to the world, who's looking to real life, who's looking to science and technology as evidence of these laws in practice.
In his 7 Cosmic Laws, he does write about science, opinionate about science, and he's very frank with his sources in this book. Like I said, he mentioned many authors and traditions by name. He doesn't unnecessarily cloak it in myth or romance. And many specific scientists, philosophers, and thinkers are quoted here. So, and he even references his own Kybalion.
Yes.
Several places.
Yeah. And I think,
No, he's he can do that. I mean, he deserves that. I don't think it was a classic then, was it? Did it take off very early and always remain a classic? When did it really sell?
It depends. I think we see from pretty early on. I can hold on one second. I can tell you exactly. Yeah, just a moment.
Yep. I see here he's also quoting ancient philosophers, so he was very well read.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, during Atkinson's own life, we have references to the Kybalion being made by other people. We also have in 1919 in San Diego and in 1927 in Oakland, we have different groups who are organizing classes based on the 7 Hermetic principles.
Nice.
As I mentioned in my introduction to the Kybalion, we have business classes in New York. We have theosophical classes in Washington, D.C., other classes in California that are advertising, without necessarily naming the Kybalion, advertising the 7 Hermetic master keys of wisdom, the 7 Hermetic principles. But the book never really goes away. It never goes out of print, and it seems to be not so much a public sensation as an influential text that underneath the surface keeps churning out new ideas, new groups, and new systems.
Right.
I mean, I gave a talk at a Freemasonic lodge outside of Los Angeles not too long ago, and I was not expecting much, but there was over 100 people who came out in attendance, and it turns out that for many Freemasons and many people involved in other systems of philosophy or esotericism, the Kybalion really serves as a gateway and introductory text. It is compelling, but it is also simple and accessible. And for so many people, it is the beginning of a much larger journey.
Yeah, I'd say it's a cornerstone in many Western philosophical systems and traditions by now. But he must have enjoyed.
Yeah.
He must have enjoyed the fact that it was popular in his time, referenced, and probably also speculated who was behind it. He must have known, if it took off in his lifetime, that people didn't know, and he must have desired to remain more or less anonymous in this regard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in one sense, you can look at the legacy of the Kybalion as this kind of strange and bizarre legacy that just spread out in all of these different directions.
Absolutely.
And you could also maybe look at the legacy of the Kybalion as something tragic, that this enormous text that was never really fully recognized as the work of its author. But I think both of those things would have been perfectly fine with Atkinson himself. He says in the Kybalion and elsewhere that he doesn't want to set up a church or a dogmatic school of thought, that if his ideas are useful to you, take them. If they're not, leave them. Use them as you want. And that is the most important thing for people.
Yeah.
For people to find value in those teachings and have it serve them rather than the other way around.
Yep. Very universal on so many levels.
Yeah.
Okay, let's settle down then and move the spotlight to you, because we talk about getting credit where credit's due here for authors. So I've seen some of the titles you have. And just the titles of your work are very enticing.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I wanted to read all of it when I saw it, you know.
Yeah.
And by the way, I noticed also that you've written a lot about Eastern stuff.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that your journey has more been writing about Eastern sages, and then you stumbled over Atkinson from there. Is that how it went?
Yes, that's actually one of the ways that I got interested in William Walker Atkinson was by way of his pseudonym Yogi Ramacharaka.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of both. I was interested in New Thought. I was interested in yoga, and I think both of them really have a shared history in America.
So you knew about that already before you entered the Atkinson thing? Because not many people into yoga know this connection to New Thought, you know?
I think it was something that I quickly I think it became quickly apparent when I started looking at Atkinson and his peers.
Absolutely. But you are a scholar of religion, history of religion, right?
Yeah. I'm in religious studies. So I kind of more specifically, I work as a historian of religion. I look
historian of religion. Okay.
Yes, I'm a doctoral candidate in the religious studies department at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And I'm a historian of religion in America, and I look at the American metaphysical tradition, Asian religions in America, and new religious movements. And I think in many ways Atkinson is kind of at the center of all of those things.
Yeah. When I researched you, like I said, I found many interesting titles you had, very entertaining titles, and I'll give some examples. Let's see. Yeah. So, for instance, Rishis and Rebels, the Punjabi Sikh presence in early yoga, from Maharai to Maharan Tantric, the construction of Yoga Bhayan's Kundalini Yoga. Let's see other titles here. There are some hilarious titles. The Hindu in Hoodoo, Fake Yogas, Pseudo Swamis, and the construction of African American folk magic. You know, I'd like you back for a show just on all this stuff. Are you game for that?
Sure. No
Pitching
problem.
some of your, I guess this is articles.
Yes, those are articles for academic journals.
Right. So you haven't published anything like this as books?
Not yet, no.
No. Because it seems like you have a no-nonsense approach to this. You just try to relate what you found right?
Yeah.
Without a mythological layer.
Yeah, I mean, in one way, I like to think of the research as, when people do surveys of land, there are certain reference points that are, known and fixed and stable. And I try to do research that functions like that, to be very thorough, to be very clear, to be very neutral and exact, so that there is a reference point that people can use, and that there is something without mythology that is fully supported, that other people can build off of.
But surely you must have, on a personal basis, you must have a spiritual relationship to some of this stuff.
Okay. Well,
yoga, whatever.
Yes. When I was younger, when I first started college, I did a lot of yoga. I studied Zen Buddhism for a while. So I have a background in those things. And I think in many ways it's very important to have a background in those things in order to research them.
Yeah.
You would miss out on a lot if you did not have that kind of experience of yeah.
No, I totally agree. Plus it goes a long way to explain motivation, right? Because if you're not interested in these things on a personal basis, it's going to be boring researching it, I think.
Yeah.
But things in Atkinson is pretty interesting because there conflates or merges the Eastern and the Western.
Yes.
Right.
And I think Atkinson is a crossroads where the Eastern and the Western meet up in several ways. Atkinson is a believer in kind of an imagined mystical East, but he's also having direct contact with people from India. As I mentioned, Atkinson strikes up a friendship with a man named Premananda Baba Bharati, who is a very early Krishna devotee who comes to the United States in 1904.
Yeah, and also like as regards to Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda.
Sure.
Hey, by the way, have you made any other books than Kybalion?
No, not as yet. Just that edition of the Kybalion, and that edition has been translated into a few different languages: Romanian and Portuguese for Brazil, and soon it'll have editions in Turkish and in Portuguese for readers in Portugal proper.
Cool. Because I'm pretty sure the Kybalion has already been translated to 1 million languages. So, right? So the ground should already have been cleared for you.
Yes.
Running this definite edition and getting it translated. Probably not be that hard, and it's very well sold book, and it's been reprinted and reprinted and reprinted. So I was thinking first when I saw that you published everything, good luck with that. I mean, you could get it for free online. But when I did see your edition, I think you need to make a case for people buying it, because it's all that interesting stuff that you've done in the intro about the history.
Thank you.
And then you added this 7 cosmic laws. So interesting. So it's important work you've done.
Thank you.
I really have to commend you for that.
Oh, no problem.
And even better to think that you did it on your own and not as a part of your university work. You have to be a busy guy. But if you're going to do a book on the Eastern sages, then, I mean, you have enough material, obviously, here. Then come back and we'll have you on for that.
Yeah,
or maybe anyway, we'll have you on for walking us through some of these. Because if you've been really looking into this mess of Eastern sages, because I listened to another interview you made about Kybalion, like I told you before we began. Yeah. And there you made a very good job of clearing the ground by explaining because many people don't know this, that there was this Eastern romance going on in the West back in the day.
Yeah.
I guess it started with Theosophy, the last half of the 1800s and the first half of the 1900s.
Oh.
Yes, today yoga, Eastern philosophy, all that has taken off, but it was really, the ground was prepared by all this stuff happened from 1850 to 1950, I'd say, when many of these myths were established and the Romans were blossoming. And it seems to me you're taking on some of this stuff, you're studying some of this stuff, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. My doctoral dissertation is on the early history of yoga in the United States. So from the
There you go.
mid-late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, let's do a show on that one day then, next year or something.
Yeah.
You game for that?
Yes, absolutely. It's a date.
Yeah, cool. Okay, it's been a full pleasure to have you on today, elaborating on this.
Thank you.
So thank you a lot. I know you're a busy guy, so I leave you to it. And by the way, when it closes up to release, it's going to take some time, but this is probably not going to be released until next year when that happens.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I know these things take time.
Yeah, great. So you know how it works. and notwithstanding in academia itself. So, but looking forward to see what else you have in the pipeline in the future.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, have a nice day now then, Philip.
All right, you too, Al. Yep. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, take care.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's our show for today. Albeit probably marginal to most, hopefully interesting to some. And remember, we deliberately take on small subjects like this in order to facilitate a range and a depth of our topics and explorations. And if you enjoy this, more importantly than our populist shows is for you to support it, because that will make us afford continuing doing non-commercial shows. And the best incentive you can give us in this is, of course, to support us financially or otherwise, at least spread our shows, and especially to those whom you suspect will find an interest in them. Now more so than ever because of YouTube's revision of their algorithm. Without going into details about that now, those of you who keep an eye out and follow us know about it. And remember to get Philip's version of the Kybalion. If you're motivated to get it, you have to get his version. It's the complete one. And even if you don't care about the historical aspects, the biographical stuff, at least get it for the new manuscript, which, like the Kybalion itself, goes into depths in arguing and explaining and litting the matters it raises. There's a reason it's had this long-range popularity, and you'll know why when you get it for yourself. This is the last production of 2018. We will continue doing more shows like this, meaning going into more spiritual and philosophical matters, subject areas, and explore them from different angles, be it ontological or historical. So you'll see much more of this in 2019. We will also do more political stuff, as well as once in a while make new releases to our already ongoing series, which are multiple, as you probably know. Remember, you can get a full survey of the series of programs we're doing, either at our website, where it is sorted out, even in chronological order, where that applies, because many shows should not necessarily be listened to in the chronology they were recorded, but rather in their thematic arrangements. And some series don't have a specific sequence, and those you might as well just check out through our YouTube playlists, where we also arrange these series, and again also there in the right order where that applies. And all this you'll find at our YouTube channel, or like I said, at our website. Thank you for following us today through this maze, and see you soon in 2019. Your host has been Al. Thanks to your devoted support and my fervent team. Be seeing you.
is number one.